think when the psychologist was stuck in the room was in the room with Jamie, I could sense a lot of that because I've experienced similar scenarios to that. Back in the 70s, 80s, and before that, very much that idea of children are seen, not heard, very fear-based authoritarian style of parenting, do as I say. We need to understand what's underneath the anger. Because underneath that anger is always going to be someone who is feeling alone, who's feeling misunderstood. I think we're becoming more disconnected
Yeah.
because we don't want to sit with the uncomfortable feeling. If I've been rejected by somebody, I don't want to sit with that rejection. I also find, that there's almost this lack of respect for authority. But if we think of many of the games the kids are involved with, in terms of Fortnite or, whatever their computer games are, how much of that is about,
Hi, this is Shireen Ashton for the Global Indian Network Sexuality and Identity podcast. And today I'm very pleased to be chatting with Natalie Costa. She has an amazing company called Power Thoughts. And just for the next sort of 20 minutes or so, we're going to be discussing the work that Natalie does. So hi, Natalie. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Shireen. Lovely to meet you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And we had a great conversation. It was just like a 10-15 minute conversation on Friday evening, and it was incredible just to hear about the work that you were doing with your company. So can you just take us back a little bit and explain why you set up the company and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I am a former primary school teacher. And I set up Power Thoughts about 7, 8 years ago because I was really frustrated with the education system. So many of the children in year 6, the final year of primary school before they go to secondary school, were feeling quite stressed out about their upcoming SATs exams. I had children that were preparing for school interviews for secondary school. And one of the boys in particular said to me, "Oh, Miss Costa, I'm really nervous about the school interview because I don't think I've got anything important to say." And so when I dug a bit deeper, it transpired that he had this deep belief that he felt he was boring, he wasn't interesting because of what certain people in his life had told him previously. And that really got me thinking, this little 12-year-old boy has already got this firm belief that he's not good enough, that he's not interesting. But these beliefs, as I know through my background in psychology and also having trained as a performance coach, these beliefs don't just stop, these beliefs continue to stay with us. And again, like I said, I was very frustrated because so much emphasis in the school system is placed on academics and scores and targets, but where was the emotional support? Where was the support for our children's emotional and mental health? And so Power Thoughts is a program that's designed to help children tap into the power of their own thoughts, to help them recognize that I don't have to believe every thought I think or react to everything I feel, and ultimately giving them the tools that I wish I had as a child, where we build security and confidence from within. But now the work, obviously over the 8 years, I've worked with, thousands and thousands of children, but I've also learned, it's not just the children, it's us as the adults, because the reality is, who taught us to regulate our emotions and how to deal with disappointment and frustration and rejection and not to believe every thought we think? So my work today is very much about supporting parents, in essence, helping parents raise themselves alongside raising their children.
And when we had the conversation on Friday, and you've just touched on it again just before we actually started recording this interview, just how parenting has changed over the years. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think, it really has changed. It's, back in the 70s, 80s, and before that, very much that idea of children are seen, not heard, very fear-based authoritarian style of parenting, do as I say. And I think, we've seen this real shift, and I definitely see it within my practice, where parents that come to me don't necessarily want to raise their children from that fear-based base. Hopefully we've also moved on in terms of we don't hit our children, that we've moved on from that. But now we've gone completely the other way, where almost parents, I find, are afraid to put boundaries in place, or we give a lot of choices, but can I say no? And I think we've missed the mark, that actually we've come from this real space of, I don't want to parent my children in this way, but now can I say no? And how do I say no? And we want to try and be our child's friend. And I think what we're missing is actually we need to come back to the middle because children do need boundaries. Children do need parameters because their brain's not fully developed, because they need that support and us to be their coach, that guide, and that skill. But my angle is we can raise our children from a space of empathy and compassion. So compassionate, assertive parenting. I can still say no and put really strict boundaries in place, and my child's not going to like it. But I can say no from a space of empathy and compassion, not from a space of fear. And I find that that's one of the things. And obviously, another factor that I think has hit a lot of parents over the years is also so many parents aren't able to be as present with their children as what they would like because of cost of living crisis, because most families, both parents are working, or it's there's so much. Our world looks completely different to what it did, when we were growing up, and in terms of the pressure and the demands and the expectations placed upon families, and also, like I said, childcare costs have risen by 41% in over the past, I think it was last 10 years. So there's a lot there. There's a lot of pressure faced upon parents, and so parents not being able to be as present with their children as well, I think, is something else that has a huge factor in terms of what we're seeing with our children. So there's a lot of factors.
I was just about to say, there's also a sort of disengagement sometimes as well, isn't there? If we think of the power of the internet and how much not only we spend as adults on our phones, on the internet, but also especially children. And it's maybe something that growing up a lot of adults weren't necessarily used to, but there's this huge shift now, isn't there? And the power of the internet and what children are actually exposed to as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're the first generation to raise children in a fully digital world. If we think about, we didn't grow up with these devices in our hands, but our kids are growing up literally with these devices. And so it does feel daunting because we are learning this to navigate this context just as much as our children are. Whereas I think, when our children are going to be adults, they're going to be familiar with the online world because that's just a part of who they are. So there is that. And I do think, yes, definitely, the internet, the online space allows us to be so connected 24/7, and it is great in so many ways. But I think we haven't really come to terms or really fully understood the impact that this also has on the brain, on development, on social engagement. I'm seeing that we're more connected than ever before, but we're feeling more disconnected than ever before. And we know the impact that the internet has, and in terms of social media and so forth, in terms of our attention span and the dopamine hits and all of those little things. But now we're also giving these devices and allowing our children access to this with a brain that's not yet fully developed. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see where this goes in the next 10, 20 years time, in terms of what impact does this really have on a brain development as a growing human being. And it's like you say, it's something that we even struggle with as adults. So it is it is an interesting time in terms of seeing how this is going to pan out.
And we've also touched on the TV series Adolescence. A lot of people are talking about it. I mean, there's a lot of discussions around children, their behaviour. I mean, how did you find it just watching it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a confronting a series to watch. Not all of it was new to me because I was a primary school teacher for a long time, but prior to that, I also worked in pupil referral units and council support services. So I could relate a lot emotionally. I think when the psychologist was stuck in the room was in the room with Jamie, I could sense a lot of that because I've experienced similar scenarios to that. But to me, I think what's really confronting is this can happen to any family. It's not just, and I think, that there was so much there that the family was doing right, quote unquote, in inverted commas, but also again showing just how I think how lost our kids are in terms of, boys and girls in terms of the online space and actually just what is available to them from such a young age and how impressionable they are. And also really the more nuanced things that were shared in terms of, yes, the generational cycles, the patterns being passed down. So I think the father had said, he was beaten as a child and he never wanted to beat his child, but yet understandably he never hit his children, but still his emotions still managed the house, dictated the house in terms of his lack of being able to work through his anger in a healthy way. And I think I see this across board as well with children, but with boys as well, in terms of not having the skills or the language to know how to deal with anger, how to deal with those difficult emotions, the uncomfortable emotions. So that was another factor. And as well, I mean, it really, I think, highlights to us just where we're at in society with our children and really what needs to change in terms of the messages our children are receiving from a very young age about what it means to be a boy, what it means to be a girl, how it means to treat each other from a very young age, but then equally just the real power that the online space has for our kids at such an impressionable age. And I think, things like even tech companies, I think, like I said to you before this conversation, it feels like there's a lot of responsibility just on the parent. Let's just remove screens. That's not the answer. It's actually, this is a much bigger conversation. Where are the policies in place that really protects our children in terms of what they can access, what they can't access? What are the tech companies doing? Because where's their responsibility in this? And then we also look at things like, well, where do kids go for connection? Because they do connect online, but then our youth services and all of our youth community hubs have all shut down, and mental health support, which I'm always going on about, that there's a lack of mental health support until it's almost not too late, but it's our CAMS list, is incredibly long in terms of families wanting access for children's mental health support. So all of these things play a part. And then you've got parents that are working that can't be present and, think their kids are safe upstairs in their home, but actually they've opened up the door to a world full of strangers. There's a lot. It's a big topic.
Systems, isn't it? Because we see in adolescence, we see that the teachers in a way can't control the emotions, all these emotions coming out, and they feel like they've not got control because, again, it's so underfunded, the school system. And as you're saying about the tech companies as well, they have such a responsibility. But also when we are talking about mental health, because we're having so many conversations around mental health, and yet as adults can't even find the right support or the funds to be able to get mental health support. So it's, children are not going to be able to find that either, are they? Especially if they're struggling.
Exactly. And I think, if we look at schools, absolutely, they're underfunded, under-resourced, teachers are already stretched to their limit. I also find, that there's this lack of respect for authority. But if we think of many of the games the kids are involved with, in terms of Fortnite or, whatever their computer games are, how much of that is about, killing levels of authority, so there's that lack of that. And I think and then again, if we think about mental and emotional well-being, if we're looking at emotional agility as a society, I don't feel that we really have ever been equipped to know how to deal with difficult emotions. I want to fix, I want to problem solve, I want to shut it down, or I want to, harm you in some way if I don't get what I want. We've never really been given the tools to lean into the discomfort of the rejection. If I'm rejected, if I'm disappointed, if I feel jealous, recognizing the emotion for what it is, and how do I process it and work through it in a healthy way, so that I'm responding versus reacting. And we see this on all levels. I really feel, personally, I feel we live in an emotionally illiterate society, immature society, because so many of our leaders don't seem to know how to deal with their difficult emotions in the right way. And if we think about this as well with the adults, like I said, if we think of typically, and I know not everybody's experience is the same, but many of the clients that come to me do have experiences of when they grew up in that strict authoritarian style space. So a lot of the difficult emotions like anger were shut down, or we were punished for feeling anger. And yes, the behavior is something we need to address 100%. But what ends up happening is that we're shutting down the anger, or we shame for behaving in a certain way. When actually, what I try and get parents to understand is that with our children whose brains simply cannot regulate emotions properly, who won't be motivated, who won't always initiate, or who will struggle to tolerate frustration, because that part of the brain's only fully developed by our mid 20s. And so they will have big emotions and behave in certain ways. And we need to understand what's underneath the anger. Because underneath that anger is always going to be someone who is feeling alone, who's feeling misunderstood, who's feeling less than. And that's where we need to connect. But we as adults have never been given those skills.
And we just need to tap into them emotions, don't we? And know what we're feeling as adults, and then recognizing that in children and just getting them to talk about their emotions as well and their feelings. I find being an actor, I think, just with the acting training that I've had and still day-to-day work that I do as an actor, you're tapping into these emotions and these feelings. But even then, it's, we just want to have conversations with people and as adults and recognize feelings as well. And going back to the internet and the power of it, I think because everything's so instant, people are losing these connections of what it makes us to be human and to have what bonds us, I guess, together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're becoming more disconnected because we don't want to sit with the uncomfortable feeling. If I've been rejected by somebody, I don't want to sit with that rejection. So it's easier for me to scroll, to tap out, to click, to buy, to, whatever those things are. So it becomes so much more easy, and we get those little dopamine hits. And I think it's also normalizing, going back to, allowing our children to talk about their feelings, but that starts with, exactly as you said, me understanding my emotions first and not judging them. And one of the things I do with families is let's personify the emotion, because our feelings are like visitors. I say to kids, they come and they go. The anger comes, the jealousy comes, and then it goes again. But let's create a character for that. And where do I feel that feeling in my body? Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it fizzy? What color is it? What shape is it? And what is that feeling trying to tell me? And what does that feeling need right now? Is it maybe that I need a hug? Is it that I need some time by myself? And what am I making myself mean about this feeling, that I'm not good enough? Okay, is that really 100% true? What else could be true? But we never give ourselves the space to sit with us. And I'm not saying sit and wallow in it, we don't want to wallow in it, but let me give it some space. And actually, there is, I forgot her name now, but she's got a brilliant TED talk called My Stroke of Insight. It's a neuropsychologist or neuroscientist that suffered from a stroke. And through her experience and through her work, they actually deduced that we can feel an emotion only for 90 seconds. Physically, physiologically, the chemical reactions, it comes and it goes. But the reason why we continue to feel it is because of the thoughts we associate with that, the thoughts we continue to tell ourselves about that emotion. And these are the things that we've never been taught. We just go on, I feel this way, therefore I'm going to react. And so I feel rejected, therefore I'm either going to, hit back at you, or I'm going to make it mean something about myself. But I never allow myself to lean into that discomfort. And that's really where a lot of the real work begins.
It was funny when you were talking about emotions then, because a friend of mine, she also works with children, and she's actually used as a great example the Disney film Inside Out.
Yeah.
Actually thinking about it, that's such a great film for children, I think, to see about how different emotions work. And just you gave me that little thought.
Yeah. It absolutely is. And I think also as well, by talking about these emotions, beginning to understand what you're feeling, we're normalizing them. Because I think there's this idea, if we think again with boys, big boys don't cry and boys don't talk about their feelings. That was highlighted in the series a bit in terms of various aspects. I think the police officer that was trying to talk to Jamie's friend, and he said, did Jamie ever talk about how his friends were how he was feeling? And he's like, no, we don't talk about that. But again, that is all passed down. And I think we need to be the cycle breakers. And especially, I think, calling for men as well, those role models for men to be those cycle breakers in terms of let's normalize me talking about my emotions and how I feel, and the that is not vulnerable, but actually it's a sign of strength. Because again, we know male suicide is much more higher than female
Yeah,
suicide.
absolutely.
Um, and it all starts from, right, I've got to be the one to make the change, taking that, what I said before, the call of radical responsibility. I've got to be the one. If I want it to be different for my son, for my cousins, for my niece, for my nephews, I need to be the one to start making that change.
And how does it work with yourself when you get a new child coming to you? How do you sort of, I know you've touched on it a little bit just as we've been talking about, how does it work when you're introduced to a new child and the work that you do with them?
Yeah, so I mean, various, avenues. Parents might reach out to me because their child struggles with confidence, anxiety, anger. And so, and other times, parents just themselves want support as well. So when I work with children, I take them through a process where they begin to understand what happens in their brain when they feel stressed, anxious, overwhelmed. We look at the different parts of the brain, their thinking brain and their feeling brain, and what happens when those feelings get so big in their body that the feeling brain almost takes over and I react. We then look at strategies to help keep their thinking brain in control. So that's, through breath work, through movement, to keep, to regulate their nervous system. Things we also look at is I help them explore their thoughts and their mindset, their thinking patterns, reframing those self-doubts into more empowering thoughts. And it's not about positive thinking, but giving them a strategy where they realistically start to question their thoughts. Is this really 100% true? How does this make me feel? What would be a different thought? We also use visualization. So I teach children about the science of visualization. We step into act as if into the version of themselves that version 2.0. We also spend a lot of time understanding about mistakes and how mistakes are a good thing. We look at neuroplasticity. We make brain cells from pipe cleaners if there's younger kids. Aspects around confidence. These are coaching tools and modalities that help children begin to develop the tools to help them step out of their comfort zone, to adopt that growth mindset, and fundamentally shift perspective. Because sadly, within schools, and I know schools do a great, many schools are trying to do a great job in terms of teaching growth mindset, but our whole system is not growth mindset. We're still living in a system where it's like, when I achieve this, then I'm good enough. But if I achieve that, then I'm not good enough. And if it's hard, then maybe that means I should give up. Whereas actually, every mistake and setback and failure is actually what I need, because that's going to help me learn to get to the next level. And so we've got the whole relationship with failure completely wrong. And I think, it's trying to help families debunk this and shift the narrative in their home with the conversations parents are having with their children. And equally then supporting parents in terms of how do you stay more present and regulated when your child is triggering you and is really activating you. Because at the end of the day, you have to be their substitute prefrontal cortex. That's the part of the brain that regulates the emotions, because their prefrontal cortex is only fully developed by our mid-20s. I've not been given the skill, so I'm having to learn this as an adult alongside my child.
And as you said about the school system, again, there's so many great teachers out there. I remember at least people that I had that really had an impression on me when I was younger, but not everybody has that. And also, not all children can necessarily do exams in a way. They all learn at different rates, as we're finding.
Yeah.
Some kids are great at the theory side of things. Other kids are more, more the physical aspects of things. I'm sure you must have seen this as a teacher as well, but just seeing it's always based on them targets and them grades. It's what the schools and with Ofsted are based on.
Yeah.
It's so frustrating, isn't it?
It is really, really frustrating. And I think it's, and even more so with the rise of neurodiversity. When I say the rise of neurodiversity, we're more aware of neurodiversity now. Whereas, before it might have been, that's the naughty kid, that's the kid that can't do anything, the dumb kid, where actually we now know, their brain just doesn't learn in this way. And actually, I find we're still, despite all that we know, we're still trying to force circles into square pegs, like square shapes within schools. And we all learn in different ways, and we all have different gifts and at different paces. And I think the whole system needs a revamp, because sadly, how many children, and this is also the sad thing, because our core beliefs on who I think I am, if I'm good enough, if I'm not good enough, if I belong, if I think I'm worthy, our core beliefs are formed in our formative years, 0 to 7. Because 0 to 7, the brain is in a theta brainwave state. And then from about 7 to about 12, it's in an alpha brainwave state. But what that basically means is that your brain is almost in like a hypnosis state. So, you know, with your little kids, they can do imaginary play and drink tea from cups and there's nothing in them, because they're operating in a different brainwave state versus to you and I, which is beta. And the reason why is because in those formative years, they're downloading literally the programs from society, from environment, from the adults around them. They're looking to see that from the world around them, how do I behave? And sadly, so often we then get, from a very young age, we then start to develop those beliefs of, I'm not lovable if I don't behave in ABC, but I'm lovable if I do XYZ. And those beliefs we carry with us into our adult years. 95% of how we operate today is down to the programming that we received in our formative years. And I see this with myself. If I think of, my tend to work a lot, workaholism and perfectionism, but what's underneath that? If I really unpeel the onion layer there, it's, well, I'm not good enough if I don't achieve XYZ, or burnout, or, in so many different ways. And I think it's the school system and how we raise, how we supposedly assess our kids has a large part with that as well, for the children that do struggle to access the curriculum as it is. And what's really sad is if we think it, some of our really successful people, really successful inventors, 9 times out of 10, all of them have had, some sort of challenge, whether it was dyspraxia, or I remember, one of my clients, he was 10, really struggled with dyspraxia and dyslexia. And when he learned that Einstein also struggled with this, it's like his whole perception changed.
Yeah, changed.
Right? And I just think it could just look so different. It could just look so different.
We've seen so many of these posts, haven't we? I think on social media, this person who's very successful, they didn't get the success till in the 40s. This person had X, Y, and Z, as you were just saying about Einstein. And suddenly it does make your mentality shift that actually, if you have certain conditions, it's not necessarily a bad thing. You just need to tap into them feelings and emotions and use it to your advantage.
Yeah. And I think being in an environment that can support it for that advantage as well. And I think it's really interesting, because I think we've taken this one size approach with education and like, this is how it is. But if we go back into the history of education, it was set up when we wanted to prepare people to work in factories, but we're not working in factories anymore. And I do feel that the whole system does need a revamp. It needs a complete overall, and allow kids to tap into their strengths in different ways. I mean, one tip that might be helpful for your audience, and that I always get my families to do, is to look at the character strengths. So I can send you the link, but there's a website that you can go to, and you can do it as an adult. And there's also a child-friendly version where you identify what your top 5 character strengths are. So this is things like bravery, love, curiosity, gratitude. And studies have found that actually, even just by knowing my character strengths, my top 5, because there's 27 of them, and knowing my top 5 character strengths, and then seeing how can I bring in this character strength within my week, actually increase levels of happiness and success over the long term. And I think, it's helping our children see, okay, you might struggle at maths, you might struggle at spelling, but inherently you are so brave, or you've just got such a mind for curiosity and creativity to solve problems in such a different way. How can we use these character strengths that you naturally are good at and bring them into your everyday? And this is something that nobody can ever take away from you. And I think it's, helping kids build them up from the inside out, versus that, even though I got 2 out of 10 on that spelling test, this is how my brain is operating, and this is how I'm using it to solve different problems in a different way.
And it's looking at challenges and struggles in more of a positive way than a negative way. as well.
Totally. And that's the thing, that's how we know. I always, when I work with children, and, being stereotypical here, but many of the boys I work with love footballers and they want to aspire to be the next footballer. But we actually then look at, let's say, if it is Ronaldo, okay, let's have a look. How many games did Ronaldo lose at? How many times did he not score? When did he not work? When did things not work out for him? Okay, but what was his mindset? Well, how did he approach that? Did he just give up? Did he throw a big tantrum on the football pitch? Sometimes he does and he gets sent off. I don't know. But it's helping them see that actually all of the setbacks and the disappointments, that is what helped him to become successful to where he is today. And so again, then helping them step into the shoes, or act as if, you were at school and you got your maths test back. What would Ronaldo be saying? Would he say, "Oh, give up, this isn't good enough"? He'd be like, "Oh, come on, we can do this. Like, what can we learn from this?" But again, it's helping, and it's understanding that actually these mistakes and these setbacks, it is difficult. Let's sit with that disappointment. Okay, this really isn't great right now. Okay, this isn't good. Let's process this. Okay, and now what are we going to do about it? What can I do differently? What can I learn? And I think that's the bit we need to celebrate, not the fact that I get 10 out of 10, the progress we make. And also, I think Carol Dweck in her book Mindset mentioned as well, when children actually knew and understood what was going on in their brain, that physiologically I'm making more neural connections, my neural connections are becoming stronger when I make mistakes. That also helped them to embrace making mistakes more readily, because they knew that actually their brain was growing, as so to say.
It's so fascinating, the work that you do. So where can people find you, whether it's online through your website or your work?
Yeah, sure. So you can find me online on Instagram at Power Thoughts NC, and for Natalie C for Costa. My website at the moment is powerthoughts.co.uk. And LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn as well. So all of those places, so people can connect with me on there.
Brilliant. And what do you have coming up, if you've got anything exciting that you want to share?
Yeah, so I do a lot of work in the corporate space as well for working families. I've worked with quite a few global brands, so I work with go and deliver lunch and learns. I've also got content specifically for organizations, either for parents or for their children. And that's been very well received, around big emotions, worry, anxiety, how to get along with your teen. And then I've just reopened a few spaces in my Moving Beyond Behaviors program. So that is for parents and children, one-to-one, going through a lot of what I've shared here on today's call.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Natalie.
Thank you.
The work that you're doing is just amazing, and it's much needed as well. So
thank you.
I'm forward to keeping up to date with what you're up to, and obviously sharing your work out with our network as well. But thank you for
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.